You're tuned into That's Life, where we celebrate the beauty, the chaos, and the wonder of real life. Sometimes it makes you laugh, sometimes it makes you cry, but it always makes you feel. Settle in. We're just getting started. To feel every cell of his own body, yet remain motionless. To sense smells and sounds, but not understand their origins, their meaning. Even the names of objects capable of smelling or sounding like that slip from memory. His head was emptier than ever before. This emptiness seemed perfect, absolute, and terrifying, as if the former world had vanished without a trace, taking everything with it. He couldn't remember himself, his condition, the place he was in, or the reasons that had brought him here. He simply lay there. This was the only thing he understood with absolute clarity. Everything else, his name, thoughts, feelings, was hidden behind a dense, impenetrable fog. Finally, as if resolving to do something difficult and dangerous, he tried to open his eyelids. A convulsive effort yielded results, and faint glimmers of light pierced the impenetrable darkness where nimble colored dots and zigzags danced senselessly. They grew, merged, turning into two flickering, trembling slits. In the next instant, bright daylight flooded his eyes. A monstrous pain pierced his head, forcing him to shut the eyelids he had opened with such difficulty in fright. He silently prayed for the return of the blessed darkness he had so rashly lost. There, in the darkness, it was calm. Now pain thrashed in his head without rhythm or measure, absolute, omnipresent, unbearable. It was the strongest pain he had ever experienced, and this he, remembering nothing, understood perfectly clearly. A muffled, plaintive moan escaped his chest. A moment later, he felt a sweat-soaked strand of hair creep upwards on its own. Then something cool and soft settled on his forehead. This touch was surprisingly pleasant and soothing. It instantly eased the unbearable pain, taking away a part of it. The hammers, saws, and needles raging in his head began to lose their sharpness and weight, diminishing, retreating. His convulsively flared nostrils caught a light, barely perceptible scent. Notes of freshness, tartness, something sparkling, simultaneously long familiar and completely unknown, were wonderfully intertwined within it. Then he felt life-giving moisture on his lips. A blissful feeling spread through his parched, raw throat, rough as sandpaper, as the liquid flowed down. This was followed by a quick, light prick in the shoulder, like a mosquito bite. He gratefully and relievedly moaned, and then he heard a voice, thin, like a silver bell, quiet, like the rustle of grass, gentle like a kitten curled up under his palm. Well, that's good, very good. Just wonderful that you've woken up. I was starting to get scared, the voice said. And now you need to rest. Sleep. Sleepy, sleepy, sleep. Sleep and wake up. Well, almost healthy. Sleep! The wonderful sounds of the voice seemed to drift away, fading. A last childish thought flashed through his mind. Has Mom come back? This effort deafened him with the final echo of intense pain. He instantly fell into silence and darkness. Tap, 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 tap. The sound was quiet but rhythmic, squeezing into his consciousness. It took a long time to gather strength, remembering with horror how the previous attempt to open his eyes had ended. Finally, tensing up and preparing for a possible blow of pain, he slightly opened one eye. Listening to his sensations and feeling nothing suspicious, he unglued his eyelids. This time he didn't shut them, but only out of astonishment. A gnome was staring at him with huge blue eyes, without blinking. A real gnome, short, half a man's height, with a long gray beard, thick hanging eyebrows, a large nose, and a huge red cap. Without taking his eyes off him, the amazing creature was lightly tapping the floor with a stick. Noticing his bulging eyes, the gnome tilted his head, tugged at his beard, and giggled. He closed his eyes as if hoping the strange vision would disappear, when he opened them again. But it only got worse. Now instead of one gnome, he saw two. This one was a little taller, or maybe the bright blue cap just seemed bigger. It's clear he's gone mad and he's definitely started hallucinating. And quite strange and characteristically quite persistent ones. The phantoms not only weren't going to disappear, but on the contrary, began circling around him with sounds resembling a very familiar tune. Evidently attracted by these strange calls, a third gnome joined them, this time in a bright yellow cap. Yes, it's clear I've lost my mind, he thought with surprising calmness, watching the round dance of multicolored caps with some pleasure. Well, at least I'm going crazy cheerfully with songs and dances. And I could have been losing my mind in the company of some scary spiders, for example, or skeletons. But look at these darlings. And they sing wonderfully. What are they singing? Something very familiar. Long, long forgotten. Although it's impossible to forget this. Oh my God, it's a fir tree was born in the forest! Of course! He smiled with difficulty, crookedly, and moved his lips, involuntarily repeating the words of the children's song. All right, everyone out of here, quick! He heard a voice. He recognized it immediately. It was that same soft, silvery, whispering timbre that had made him feel so calm last time. True, now it wasn't whispering, but contained angry, ringing notes of annoyance, clearly intended for the mischievous gnomes. In response, there was a chorus of stubborn snuffling. "You are not to enter this room!" The voice came from somewhere to the side, and he couldn't manage to see the speaker. He was still afraid to turn his head. "But this is our room. We have our things here. And I need to get under my bed. I just need to. And haven't you seen the markers? And I don't want to sleep next to Leo anymore. You know what he does in his sleep? I'll tell you in your ear later." A clamor arose. "We'll sort it out later. And now, hold on to each other and form a train out there. Through the door. Quickly," came the reply. The gnomes obediently grabbed onto each other's clothes. The one who happened to be in front, with full responsibility for the mission entrusted to him, dragged the colorful train away. Watching them go, He closed his eyes tiredly. Looks like I need to learn how to distinguish reality from visions. And at the same time, come to terms with the fact that fairy tale creatures are calmly bouncing around him, singing songs familiar to any child from the earliest childhood. How are you doing? A voice asked above him, and he again felt the thin, slightly tart scent of freshness. Oh, yes, you're doing great. You can look right here, at the tip of my finger. Okay, good. Now I'll move it. Don't take your eyes off my finger. Good. That's it. That's it. More. Look at the finger. Why can't you? He really couldn't. But not because his eyes refused to obey him. Not at all. He simply didn't want to take them off the face bent over him. A fairy? A mermaid? Who is this? What an amazing creature is standing next to him, so close that he can see the thin bluish vein on her temple. What, a vein? So she's human? No, it can't be. There are no such creatures among humans. Humans, they are coarser, denser, wider, heavier, louder. They are covered in thick skin, covered with hairs. They have bright, fleeting faces. And they constantly show their teeth in unnecessary smiles. By the way, she could well be a representative of any of the listed fairy tale races, since she just kicked out a whole crowd of gnomes from here. So why shouldn't she herself be a dryad or a sylph? After all, he had already come to terms with being in some strange frozen world. Her face, as if outlined by masterfully drawn calligraphic strokes. High, sharp cheekbones, almost straight eyebrows sweeping toward her temples, a small nose, delicately outlined lips, pale, matte, transparent skin. Everything about this face was inexpressibly thin, graceful, light. It seemed woven from fog, from mist. And if you blew harder, the face would melt, disappear, just as fantastic figures, clearly visible in the swirls of clouds, disappear. She was not a beauty whose image imprints itself on your mind once and for all. And yet it was impossible to forget her, like a sunset or the blooming of a cherry tree, and impossible to keep her close, just like the scent of a flower or a fading evening ray. And yet there was something in this face that firmly held him to the ground, preventing him from disappearing carelessly and frivolously. Her eyes, huge, gray blue. However, he wouldn't vouch for their color. It was quite possible that this amazing creature could easily change their color at will. Well, there it is. Just now, they were gray with a bluish tint. But a few moments later, they darkened and became the color of dark pearl, probably because their owner frowned in bewilderment. But apparently, the anxiety was unfounded. Her forehead smoothed, her lips twitched in a slight smile. And now her eyes shone with warm, joyful blue aquamarines. Her eyes were wonderfully expressive. There was anxiety in them, then a sly smirk, then quiet, calm sadness. They laughed and cried, rejoiced and grieved, joked and questioned. And for all this, their owner didn't need to open her mouth and utter words, shed tears, frown or smile, like other people. He tore himself away from her face with difficulty and stared at the tip of a thin finger with a short oval nail. Can you hear me? Hello? She leaned over his face and looked intently into his eyes. This took his breath away and made his throat tickle. Look at me. That's it. Good. And now again. Look to the right. Now to the left. Good. Well, seems okay. She mumbled something in her elven human. Pupils are calm. Temperature is normal. No nausea. Eye movement is painless. Let's assume we got off with a slight fright. Yes, he nodded happily. Not understanding a word of what she said, he would have agreed to anything right now without hesitation, just so she would stay near him as long as possible. It suddenly became completely unimportant where he was, what was happening to him, even unimportant who he himself was and why he couldn't remember it. If all this was the price for meeting these incredible eyes with the elusive light smile, slightly anxious, pale, thin lips, with hands smelling of green leaves, lemon juice, and rain, well, for such a price he was gladly willing. And then the fairy surprised him. With strong, dexterous, not at all ethereal hands, she unexpectedly lifted him by the shoulders and slipped a pillow under them. Well, now you need to eat, she said. After these words, so simple and earthly, he finally came to his senses. Until this second, he had been as if in a trance, in some enchanted state, powerlessly observing the amazing phenomena changing before him. And now the hypnosis was over, and immediately his head, ribs, leg, and for some reason, the bandaged fingers on his right hand began to ache, throb, and twitch. And his stomach rumbled so loudly that she listened in surprise and nodded understandingly. A few minutes later, he was savoring, burning himself, amber chicken broth from a large mug, with specks of fragrant herbs, probably some kind of magical potion. Then there was another light and quick prick in the shoulder, after which the pain, which had been trying to snatch the cup of broth from him, quickly began to subside. Well, that's good. Now you need to rest, and then we'll talk, she said, her eyes shining cheerfully. It seemed his appetite, which, frankly, little could affect, pleased her. She helped him lie back on the bed, and dimming the brittle winter bright day, drew the curtain. Although it seemed to him that she did it with some magical movement. Tell me, he raised himself, fighting the quickly overwhelming sleepy stupor. The gnomes? Were the gnomes really actually gnomes? She turned around and laughed, as if scattering silver bells. Yes, the gnomes were real. Good, he whispered to himself. So everything else is also real. So she is also real. With this comforting thought, he fell asleep. His third awakening was simpler, much more pleasant than the previous two. He lifted his eyelids without even remembering the fear of pain, and immediately rushed to search for his fairy with his eyes. That's what he mentally called the striking creature, leaving behind a disturbing charm. Disturbing because he still understood nothing, and for some reason didn't want to start understanding. He seemed to be suspended between past reality and a new, unknown one, and frankly, he didn't want to go back. Perhaps she felt he was awake and appeared. Yes, she didn't enter, but appeared, as if woven from air. Good morning, afternoon, evening, she said, looking intently into his eyes. An excellent sleep. You could even say outstanding. She pulled up a chair and sat down. Well, let's talk. She tilted her head. Do you remember anything? Of course, everything. He nodded. You, the broth, the gnomes, 3 of them, red, blue, and yellow, and you. And that's all? She asked again. And that's all? He nodded cautiously. How could he explain to her that for some reason he didn't want to remember anything else when he had her face, the scent of freshness from her thin hands, and the funny, airy song about the fir tree? Well, okay, let's start with the simplest. She was relentless. What's your name? My name? He was surprised. It turned out he had forgotten that every person must have a name. My name is something was spinning and disappeared. I don't remember. He shrugged guiltily. I don't know. Well, that's a problem. And I don't know, she sighed. You see, you had nothing on you. No documents, no phone, no card, just nothing that could help us understand who you are, where you came from. Maybe you remember a name, an address, a phone number, anything? No? Apparently, you have amnesia. Temporary, let's hope. Don't be scared. She looked at him doubtfully, obviously seeing no hint of fear on his face. It happens, and quite often, with head injuries, contusions, you need to rest well and try to remember yourself. How did I get here? To you? He asked, although he really wanted to say, with you. Listen, she smiled. It's awkward that we're using the formal you like in an interview. Let's switch to the informal you, okay? Hey, what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? Is your head spinning? She leaned in anxiously, watching his strained face. Yes, something's wrong, or rather, it's about to be. How terrible. How could he confess to the magical fairy that he was starting to be tormented by the most earthly, prosaic need? What was he supposed to do now? He looked at her with a shy plea. Ah, I understand. She nodded calmly. Well, get up. Let's go. You're not as immobile as you might think. By the way, all the more reason for us to switch to the informal you faster. Such matters are easier to resolve between good friends, aren't they? He didn't even notice how, to the sound of her silver voice, he found himself awkwardly standing on his feet, tucking his heavily bandaged limb under him. Just a bad sprain, she explained, following his gaze. She slipped under his arm with a quick, flexible movement. So they hobbled to a place that, to his surprise, existed not only in the homes of mere mortals, but also in the dwellings of fairies. There he looked at his reflection and recoiled in fright. A gaunt type with dull, sleepy eyes stared back at him from a mirror cracked in the corner. With a scrape on his forehead, slightly covered by tangled hair, and a considerable 3-day stubble. Aha, looking good, his hostess nodded cheerfully. But I must admit, all this somehow suits you. We even gave you a nickname, the Noble Night Bandit. The boys think you fought bravely, but couldn't withstand 100,000 enemies. Well, never mind. You'll get a little stronger now. I'll give you a razor and a comb, and you'll be shaved, decent, and boring again. He really wanted to ask who we were, what boys she was talking about, and why being shaved was boring, but he didn't dare. Well, she said, when he had settled back onto the bed. So, you don't remember anything? Well, Then I'll tell you what I know. Maybe some memories will come back to you. Something will suddenly pop into your head, okay? By the way, my name is Victoria. Vicky. This is my apartment. So you can stay here as long as you need, completely at ease. So, the fairy tale fairy, the enchanted creature, turned into a perfectly real young woman named Victoria. But his involuntary inner tremor at the sound of her voice, the scent of her hands and hair, at the sight of her eyes, that didn't go away. And it only grew stronger with the joyful thought that all this belonged to someone who wouldn't disappear or deceive him. Half an hour later, he was thoughtfully twirling the edge of a fluffy blanket, going over everything he had heard from Victoria in his mind. She had found him on the street, not far from her house, late in the evening, lying in a snowdrift, in just a shirt and jeans, beaten and unconscious. Asking a passerby for help, she had dragged him to the emergency room. They were asked to leave. He had no documents. And yet, at her requests, demands, pleas, and threats, he was brought to consciousness. His head and leg were bandaged, and his fingers were wrapped. To a clinic? I don't have one. Sorry. That's why I brought you to my place, put you to bed. Well, you know the rest, she finished simply. But don't worry. I'm not a doctor, but at least I can provide you with first aid and proper care. After all, I have 5 years of medical school behind me. She sighed lightly, thought about something, but then, as if catching herself, smiled easily and brightly. You'll rest for a couple of days. Maybe you'll remember something. And anyway, you need to recover faster because New Year's is in a week. Something twitched, turned slightly, stirred in his head, but then fell silent again. I see. So, you live here alone? He asked cautiously, still unaccustomed to using the informal you with her, and asked a very important question for him. What if everything collapsed now? What if his fairy had a legitimate fairy? Maybe he was just away on a business trip or out for a couple of days on errands. Well, why alone? She chuckled. And his heart ached with longing. Completely alone. Although, to be honest, sometimes I really dream of being alone, even for a little while. You've already seen my company. That's how we live, the four of us, with the gnomes. You live with gnomes? He asked, shocked. With 3, he clarified. For some reason, the funny ambiguity of his question hung in the air, and suddenly Vicky began to shake quietly with laughter. He looked at her in surprise, smiled uncertainly, and giggled. Clutching his ribs with crushing pain, wincing and groaning, he himself burst into laughter. Aha! That's the kind of Snow White I am, though slightly shortchanged by fate, Vicky laughed, finally turning into a charming, earthly woman. I only have 3 gnomes, not enough for a full set. Calming down, wiping away the tears brought on by laughter, Vicky stunned him with an incredible fact. Completely at odds with her. It turns out that the gnomes are, of course, not some kind of fairy tale creatures at all, but children, little ones. The 5-year-old twins, Gus and Leo, and Victor, who is the same age. And when he first saw them, they were trying on costumes prepared for the New Year's party at kindergarten. That's how his delusion was amusingly dispelled. Wait, I don't understand. If Gus and Leo are twins, and Victor is their age, they should be triplets, shouldn't they? He tried to understand why the news that Victoria had 3 children didn't shock him at all. Probably because everything about her had to be unusual, not like other women, even if she was earthly, and she had a wonderful but quite ordinary name. And she even studied at an institute once, like ordinary mortals. But she was still a miracle. Extraordinary and incredible. She had 3 little ones. Well, that was also a miracle. Well, why necessarily triplets? Vicky smiled. Not necessarily. There's a riddle for you. Lie there and think. It's very useful in your condition. Okay, but we've done the bandages. You've slurped up the soup. I've given you the injection. Now sleep. He hastily caught her thin hand, smelling of that same melody of green coolness and freshness. And he pressed it to his lips. And he gasped in amazement. The palm, which he seemed to be holding tightly with his bandaged whole fingers, literally dissolved, disappeared, leaving a slight chill and sweet bitterness on his lips. He moaned with pleasure and, as usual, fell into silence and darkness. One bright, calm day, then another. His leg ached with a sprained tendon. His ribs complained painfully to each other about cruel treatment. And one of his fingers suddenly decided to swell up to the size of a sausage. And yet he had never felt so good. He couldn't explain it. He lived in a small apartment, tried to help Vicky, who was constantly busy, appearing and disappearing, and remembered children's games. The kids were wonderful, healthy, slyly intelligent, and there wasn't a drop of what is usually used to brand children from poor and single-parent families. They were amply provided with everything they needed: love, affection, care, and tenderness. And all this was generously seasoned with songs, fairy tales, pancakes, and games of hide and seek, rosy apples, and spaceship chairs. The twins Leo and Gus were charming blonde rascals, always plotting something. They constantly played tricks on everyone by the fact that no one except their mother could tell them apart. Victor, dark-haired, brown-eyed, slightly taller than his brothers, was completely different, having taken his appearance, obviously, from some very distant ancestor. And his character was completely different, serious and calm. Perhaps this was somehow explained by the eerie scar that divided the boy's upper lip in two, making him seem to lisp when he spoke. Vicky called him Bunny. However, as soon as the boy entered the orbit of his brothers, there was no trace of his thoughtfulness and seriousness. And 3 voices and 6 limbs united for common achievements. And suddenly, he began to remember. The second day of their life together was ending. The little ones started their usual cheerful roughhousing on the floor, but after a while, one of the twins slightly peeled off from the friendly tangle of arms, legs, and heads. And seized by a sudden creative impulse, he began to sing, "Tony, Tony, let's go dig potatoes! Tony, Tony, let's go dig potatoes!" His comrades supported him in unison, willingly and immediately. Vicky laughed, and he twitched and lunged forward. But he got tangled in the blanket and almost fell off the bed. "Potatoes, Tony. I remember. My name is Potatoes. I mean Tony. Anton, I'm Anton." "Well, hello, Anton. Nice to meet you." She smiled, and her eyes, now bright blue like the sea under the sun, shining, shook his hand. "Well, Anton," she said, his name with pleasure, "the first step is taken. Now everything should go faster. And maybe you should go to the police. They're probably looking for you, worrying. Although she involuntarily looked at his washed and ironed, but frankly, worn out jeans and shirt with a collar frayed to threads. Yes, I understand. I become a nuisance to you. To you, I'm sitting here eating you out of house and home. You're spending food, medicine, time, energy on me. And yes, I should leave. I understand everything, but I don't want to leave. The words burst out of him unexpectedly and surprised him no less than Victoria. Well, if you think so, of course, you can stay with us for a couple more days, get stronger. Frankly, I'd be happy if you stay for a couple of days. We have runny noses as always, all three of them. They won't let us into kindergarten, and I can't sit with them right now. Lots of work, and New Year's is just around the corner. It's simply awful. And just as if on purpose, Martha, our neighbor from the apartment across the hall, is sick. She usually helps me in such cases. So if you stay with the kids, you'll be a great help. Oh God. Finally, he could be useful to her in some way. He suddenly wanted to fall to his knees, kiss Vicky's hands, and thank her for the honor of helping her. Frankly, he didn't understand how she managed everything. Early in the morning, she would rush off somewhere. By lunchtime, she would bring a pile of colorful paper, frames, folders, and, humming something to herself, would eagerly cut and glue. Then she would easily clatter pots in the kitchen, splash water in the bathroom, gather her mysterious crafts, and rush off. In the evening, the apartment would fill with boys, shrieking, clattering, dirty sneakers and t-shirts, drawings, munching, singing, arguing, and sometimes desperate roaring. Finally, everything would quiet down and Vicky would disappear, like the last ray of sun, sometimes for the whole night. Only to appear at home as unnoticed as the first morning light enters it. But the clothes, washed who knows when, will be folded into neat piles. Rich soups, porridges, and stews will be fragrant in the pots. Everything will be in its place. And the boys would magically become clean and combed. How did she manage it? A mystery. Perhaps it was one of her magical secrets. Victoria was reluctant to tell him about her life, or rather, said nothing at all, just smiling. So there was no doubt about the futility of such stories. Why talk about the past? Can you see that here and now she is absolutely serenely happy? That she is completely content with life, enjoys every day of it, and only dreams that, God forbid, nothing should change? But much of what surrounded her somehow didn't fit the concept of absolute happiness. However, how could he judge what this amazing woman truly needed? Maybe she was truly happy? Frozen fingers, her lack of a winter down jacket, and the sole of her boot that was about to fall off, which she was gluing, thinking no one saw. These were certainly no reason to refuse a cheerful walk with the boys. And what did it matter, for example, that the pale, darkened wallpaper in the corners, the old refrigerator shaking in its last convulsions, and the fact that only one burner on the stove worked properly? So what? Did all this hinder the unrestrained fun reigning in the house, or make the dishes any less delicious? No, quite the opposite. It was so fun and great to draw together on the faded wallpaper, and no one else had such pictures on their walls. And perhaps it didn't matter at all that light, but noticeable shadows were forever etched under her amazing eyes, and her small collarbones stretched the thin light skin so that it constantly looked as if it was about to tear. Well, maybe that's how they were supposed to be. Translucent, weightless. But really, where have you seen a fairy with rosy cheeks and excess weight? Realizing he wouldn't get anything out of Vicky anyway, Anton looked more closely at everything around her and at the people living nearby. The house was small, 2-story, with a single entrance, very old, with a wide, creaking staircase. It had 4 apartments, and everyone knew everything about everyone else, and a little more besides. The house was sick, celebrated, grieved, was indignant, and rejoiced. In short, it lived, and Victoria was its small, brave heart. Anton was convinced of this very soon. Holding onto the railing, the man was already quite skillfully hopping on his 1.5 legs, accompanying the gang of boys outside. "There they are!" shouted the neighbor from the downstairs apartment, Irene, whom everyone called Auntie, behind her back, nearly trampling them. She was known for her quarrelsome, distrustful nature, was routinely in irreconcilable confrontation with someone from the neighbors, and of course was extremely displeased with the bunch of constantly noisy boys leaving trails of footprints on the clean floor of the entrance, as well as balls, candy wrappers, stray cats, mittens, scoops, and God knows what else from the children's senseless arsenal. "Sorry, I forgot to give instructions before going out," Anton laughed, hobbling up to the woman standing in the pose of a punishing fury. "You can't teach them anything," she grumbled. "They're blockheads. 1, 2, and 3. "Oh, why say that? Why?" Anton shook his head. "They're wonderful kids and so friendly. It's strange that only Victor is completely unlike either Vicky or his brothers. Not a bit. And for some reason, he says he was born on June 10th and the boys on the 25th. "Well, he's not Vicky's, and he's no brother to the twins," the neighbor replied. "I mean, he's not related to them. That soft-hearted fool took him from the maternity hospital along with her own. 2, of course, wouldn't be enough, but 3 is just right. He was abandoned." She looked angrily at Anton's puzzled face. "Don't you understand? Well, he was abandoned at the maternity hospital. His own mother abandoned him. He was born like that, a freak with a cleft lip. And everyone wants perfect babies, looking like angels, as if they're going to live in paradise later." The woman smiled bitterly and maliciously. "Well, there she is, dragged 3 home like a cat, honestly. Sometimes she doesn't have enough to feed her own, and she's put a stranger on her neck too." The years of bitterness that had permeated Irene were now clearly struggling with something bright and pure, and suddenly, kindness won. The woman smiled, and her usual mask of grimness and wariness seemed to fall from her face. Although, of course, Vicky saved Victor, where would he go like that? No one else would have taken him. A direct road to the baby home, and then to the orphanage. And there, can you imagine what would happen to him? Like that, there? They would have ruined the boy, that's all. And suddenly, as if remembering herself, she winced. Her life will start from this, well, not life, but hard labor. Now she's tearing herself apart at 3 jobs. Soon there'll be nothing left of her. And all of us women are fools. That's how we live. for who knows whom, giving ourselves completely, and then we're left with nothing. You work like a camel without rest, then you stand in the kitchen, then you sleep, almost standing up, like a warhorse. She looked at Anton, who had already started descending towards the exit of the entrance. No time to think about yourself. Go to the hairdresser. Get a massage. Just live one day in your life, only for yourself, like a real woman. I'm a woman too, by the way. And tell Vicky, if she really is going to decorate the Christmas tree in the yard, let her clean up the trash herself afterwards. Irene's shouts were audible even after the entrance door closed behind him. Ah, so that's who our Martha is these days. Anton heard another woman's voice behind him, but completely different. Quiet, calm, slightly shaky. Just in case, he counted the boys bustling in the snowdrift with his eyes and turned around. Behind him stood a short, slightly hunched old woman in a funny fur hat. You're Anton? Vicky told me about you? She smiled with an incredibly warm, kind smile. The kind only grandmothers who make no distinction between their own and others' grandchildren can. She found you, did she? And now she's nursing you back? It's not surprising. That's how she is. She's always been like that, rushing to help everyone. It doesn't matter who's in front of her. A child, a sparrow, a man, a kitten, an old woman. Just don't tell Vicky you saw me outside, she asked, smiling. She'll scold me for going out. She came running to me in the morning on her way to work, took my blood pressure, brought me pills, ordered me to lie down and not get up. But here I am. I dragged myself out. I really need to go to the post office, send gifts to my grandchildren. My grandchildren are far away. My son Simon works there. I want to see my dear Simon and the girls so badly. I just can't stand it. She sighed and dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. No, I don't blame Simon, she justified her son, unknown to Anton. Where would he find the time? It's flying halfway across the country. They're busy people, both him and his wife. They don't forget me, don't you think? They call me often, they worry too. They always promise, we'll come, we'll definitely come. But when can they? No, I understand everything. I'm just very afraid because I might die any day now and not see them. She again dabbed her eyes with the handkerchief, raised her bright, clear eyes to Anton, the kind only children and old people have, and smiled shyly. Oh, Anton, forgive me. I've talked your ear off. She laughed a small, quiet laugh. You just reminded me of my Simon. Well, it was nice to meet you. Just remember. As she walked away, carefully clutching a package, obviously with gifts for her granddaughters, he, who hadn't said a word to her, watched for a long time, unaccustomedly grieving a stranger's separation. The boys, having had their fill of playing, a noisy crowd, covered head to toe in soft snowballs, tumbled into the entrance. Anton, hobbling behind, couldn't keep up. A leather glove lay on the landing of the first floor. He's always dropping them. One of the boys authoritatively announced from above. He lives in the second apartment. Anton rang the doorbell. And after a few seconds, a thin woman with a tired face and dull eyes opened it. Walter? Anton stammered, fiddling with the glove in his hand. The woman waved her hand toward the room. A man was sitting on an old sofa. Broad-shouldered, with regular features, dark, wavy hair. Even being 100% man who preferred to admire female beauty, Anton couldn't help but admit the man sitting before him was very handsome. He was out of place and time here, among faded wallpaper, old furniture, and dusty, stale air. He should have been shining with intelligent eyes on a movie screen or been a gym coach. But the man couldn't do any of that. Not stand, not run, not jump, nothing. Because his legs, helpless, unnaturally thin, and lifelessly still, weighing nothing, bound him to the cracked, long, unpainted floor more securely than multi-ton shackles. He raised his head and smiled. Again? He said. No, really. I'll ask Mom to sew on an elastic band. I walk, but in a figurative sense. That is, I used to ride. And in a wheelchair? Anton asked cautiously. It's called a wheelchair, the man said, without self-pity and with a familiar, long-standing, therefore calm, pain. Even without a leg, I still have privileges. I can sit in my chair, even in the presence of the head of state. However bitter he was, he couldn't help but smile and laugh. Vicky came up with that for me. You know, it helps. And generally, if it weren't for her, I might have, well, it doesn't matter. And I do have a chair, yes. It's over there. Walter waved towards where a pile of metal on wheels was piled up. My old one has been repaired 10 times, all for nothing. It keeps breaking. And buying a new one is very expensive. And you have to wait for a free one. So I sit here, waiting for like a miracle from Santa Claus. From the words of the handsome young man, sitting helplessly trapped within 4 walls, there was such a sense of hopelessness that Anton lowered his eyes. And when he raised them again, he blinked in surprise. A painting hung on the wall. At first, Anton took it for a painted city landscape. A narrow street between old houses, a wet pavement reflecting the yellowish light of lanterns, and a lonely, thin human figure. And suddenly, Anton straightened up and looked more closely. The painting seemed to come alive, to stir. He even thought the little man took a small step forward. Was he hallucinating again? He looked back at Walter in a panic. Walter nodded and smiled. Anton walked closer and gasped. The painting was 3-dimensional. The houses seemed to protrude from the frame, like real ones, and it seemed that lights would soon come on in the windows. A tram would turn the corner, see the rails gleaming between the houses, and the figure would jump in place and hurry about his business. Scientifically, it's called paper toll, a technique for creating 3-dimensional paintings, Walter explained to the astonished Anton. And simply put, it's called Vicky's Little Miracle. It's her painting. She gave it to me a long time ago. I just look at this street, and sometimes it seems to me that I myself am walking along it, breathing the air after the rain, afraid of getting hit by a tram. My God, what a happiness it is to be afraid of getting hit by a tram. Never mind. He decided to change the subject. How is it? You've been staying at her place for several days and haven't seen any of her paintings? Although, yes, she doesn't keep them at home. As she once said, she's afraid of falling into self-admiration. What is there to leave? She just makes them and sells them right away. She needs money for the boys, for all her charity. And she also works shifts at the hospital, washes dishes in a restaurant. And I just sit. Walter pulled the pathetic remnants of his legs towards him and smiled. Can you imagine, she told me once. Walter, I've calculated that to buy you a new chair, I only need to make 86 paintings. I've already made 10. Only a trifle left. Isn't she a fool? A few hours ago, Anton had already heard Vicky called a fool. But then the shrill female voice was boiling with incomprehension, disbelief, and bitterness. So the word was poisonous, sticky. Now the crippled young man said it softly, gently, carefully, and it sounded like a tender, touching, shy confession. Are you leaving soon? Brown-eyed Victor looked at Anton seriously, intently. Tired of me, huh? The man nodded playfully at the boy. Getting in your way here. Yesterday, I accidentally ate Gus's apple. Well, you see, I just really love them apples. Since childhood, I always ate several of them, even with the core. Anton froze. Something inside his head powerfully surged, jumped, like a fish thrown onto the shore, trying to get back to where everything is familiar and clear. But losing strength, it fell silent again. That wasn't Gus's apple, it was mine. He ate his right away. What does that have to do with anything? He heard Victor's voice and looked at the boy bunny in confusion. I'll give you all of mine. The twins will too. Just don't leave us, at least until New Year's. Why? Anton was amazed. I'm no use to you. Mom doesn't cry anymore, Victor explained patiently and frighteningly because of the seriousness in his eyes. Well, since you came to us, she hasn't cried once. She thinks I don't see and no one sees. But I see. And no one should cry on New Year's. Everyone should be happy like us, like me. Victor said the last words confidently. The little one, born to be disadvantaged, held his head high, boasting of something he couldn't possibly have by definition. Happiness. Vicky. Anton looked at her. This smell, so fresh. What is this smell? Oh, she was surprised. It's verbena. I've always loved it. And it scares the boys away like mosquitoes. If I use a little too much, they start sneezing and leave me alone. Anton, what's wrong? He swayed, closed his eyes, and clutched his head. It buzzed. Verbena. Of course, the freshness of wet leaves and citrus. That's the smell of verbena. Mom, this is my gift, Sonny. These are my favorites. Anton, we're breaking the contract. Deal with this immediately and personally. You're something else, Miller. 18,000 euros for a week off. Only you could do that. And there will be reports. That's what's expensive. I need to change my car. Or rather, you need to change my car. Tony, stop eating apples with cores and stems. What is this really? You'll have stomach problems. USA? That restaurant? You'll buy it out? Oh, how about the one where we had such a blast with those? Well, you know. Mr. Miller, one call from you and the delivery is ours. Oh, Tony, you finally got those diamond watches. How much did you pay? How much? $500,000? Well, actually, that's okay. How can you live in this apartment? The split system here is useless. Miller, do you remember? The day after tomorrow, the whole company is flying to the Champions League final. 5 boxes booked. Phrases, whole and fragmented. Voices, engine noise, crowd shouts, computer whispers, racing car roar, mobile ringtone, clinking silverware, airport announcements. All this crashed down on Anton like a mountain avalanche. It rushed through his head chaotically, senselessly, as if trying to quickly find and occupy the places it had lost a few days ago. I remember, he exhaled. I remember. I'm Anton Miller. I'm 34 years old. I live downtown. I'm so happy for you. Her eyes shone. So happy. It's so great to remember yourself. It's like you gave yourself a gift for New Year's. She laughed. So, you have somewhere and someone to go back to? He nodded. Wonderful. A light shadow fell on her face and disappeared faster than he could blink. Simply wonderful. Well, goodbye. We'll miss you. And please, don't forget anything else. She touched his cheek more with a breath, a scent, a warmth than with her lips, and disappeared, as dreams should. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth, that was about him, about Anton Miller. The boy, the only son of a very wealthy businessman, grew up, of course, in complete comfort, provided with everything imaginable, especially after being left motherless early. Anton received an excellent education, polished to a blinding shine, and a place as the future heir of a large firm. Along with this, he acquired a destiny, prearranged down to the smallest detail, from which it was almost impossible to escape. However, the path was comfortable, luxurious, and the constant envy of others. When Anton turned 30, his father completely handed over the affairs of the large company to him. Along with this, he inherited the duties of the life of the party among a group of wealthy young businessmen, convinced that everything is for sale and purchase. It's just a matter of price. They bought and sold cars, companies, honor, clothes, foreign resorts, women, health, conscience, restaurants. Only Anton suddenly began to notice that with years, the price became higher and higher, and what was bought, worse and worse. Life began to offer outright garbage, from which his head ached with longing and his heart grew indifferently cold. And then, at the very end of the year, there was a half-joking bet. When was the last time you worked in a way that wasn't just tapping keys on a laptop, shouting into a phone, or bossing secretaries around, but truly, with your hands, what can you actually do? Take away your credit cards, your supercars, and you'll starve to death in a week, one of them flared up. I still remember your screams on the plane that people with illnesses should fly on separate flights. When was that? And anyway, that's not the point. I can easily live without money. Want to bet? Anton held out his hand. Bet, exclaimed his friend. My driver's parents are just moving out of an old communal apartment. There's your place to live. Just remember, you give up everything. Your watch, your ring, your sneakers worth $100,000, all your credit cards, your phones, and we'll monitor your accounts. But you won't pull out my porcelain teeth, Anton grumbled. That would be great, his friend laughed. Okay, you convince me. Until Christmas, on our Christmas trip. Deal. They shook hands in front of a large crowd of cheerful witnesses. So Anton Miller found himself on the outskirts, more like a slum than a city district, in an old semi-empty apartment with leaking pipes. For 2 days, he honestly held out, so to speak, on his subcutaneous fat. And then, to get food, he almost fought with stray dogs he encountered. He managed to get involved in unloading a huge truck of groceries. Dragging another box, he slipped on a banana peel thrown by someone's shoe. He felt quick, rough fingers searching his pockets and pulling the not-so-great jacket off his shoulders. And then there was cold, darkness, and silence, pain and fear. The smell of verbena, the song about a little fir tree that's cold in winter, and an adventure the length of a small life. Gnomes and a handsome invalid, a poor little apartment, a paper masterpiece on the wall, a lonely old woman, and the most delicious chicken broth in the world. But most importantly, huge shining eyes, a silver voice, and thin, strong hands with protruding bones. All this cannot be bought with money, or can it? He arrived at the familiar house and immediately saw Vicky. She was decorating a large, fluffy fir tree standing in the middle of the yard. "Anton!" she exclaimed, her gaze sweeping over the huge black Jeep, the perfectly fitting coat on the man, the shiny shoes, and she smiled. "I see you really had something to remember." "Yes, well," he said, not knowing what to do with his hands, his eyes, or himself at all, from the sharp feeling that he was completely alien here. How could this be? It had been so good just recently. They smiled at him. They loved him. Poor, sick, remembering nothing, he was one of them here and was happy. And now? What now? Vicky seemed to guess his thoughts and asked, "And what now?" "I wanted to... Thank you." He pulled a plastic card from his pocket. "What is this?" she asked with her eyes. He had never seen such a look in her eyes, and he thought he had already studied all the shades of her eyes. Now they were gray steel, and he mumbled, "Vicky, well, this is money. For you, for the boys, well, for repairs, some clothes. No, don't think. There's a lot, really a lot. You need money? I know you do." "I do," she nodded, and the silver notes also disappeared from her voice. "But not this kind, and not from you." "Well, Vicky, let's not... And you did spend on me. I ate and drank at your place for almost a week. What else?" "Is this for help?" she repeated thoughtfully. "Well, thank you, of course. But I don't take money for help, or for friendship, or for... In short, I don't need anything from you." She shook her head and added with a smile, "Well, we thought you were a noble bandit, but you're just a rich shopkeeper. We were wrong. I was wrong. Again. What a pity." He sat at the negotiations, observing the people detachedly. Opening up? Just help? He loved her. Can you hurt someone you love, or can you... What had he done? Of course, he had hurt and insulted her. After all, feelings, real feelings, cannot be bought. They can only be received as a gift. How simple. Why did he forget this so quickly? How did he forget the invalid trapped within walls? Oh, Martha, and the thin hands that smelled like his mother's perfume. "Idiot! Cretin! Moneybags!" Anton suddenly exclaimed. "You know, Mr. Miller," said his astonished interlocutor, getting up slightly, "perhaps our terms are not the most suitable for you, but I would still ask you..." "Oh, I'm sorry," Anton laughed. "I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about myself. I'll leave now. My deputy will sign everything. And I don't have time. Forgive me. I have to run. I have so much to do. After all, tomorrow's New Year's. It's time for dreams to come true." On December 31st, he patiently watched Vicky and her old neighbor untangle garlands with 4 hands. "Oh, wait, Anton, what are you doing? You're getting in my way. Oh, no, I broke a bulb on the garland because of you. And we have a get-together by the tree tonight. Martha, don't dress the boys too warmly, okay? It's warm outside." "Grandma Martha won't be able to come to the tree. A car will pick her up in an hour," Anton suddenly said. "What?" the women asked in unison and looked at him in astonishment. Yes, yes. Get ready, Grandma Martha. They'll come for you, take you to the airport, and you'll fly to your son and his family to celebrate New Year's. Your granddaughters are really looking forward to seeing you. They're making you gifts. I called your son. He even dropped his phone in joy. He'll meet you. But how? The old woman was flustered. Anton, I won't make it. I'll die. You won't die. Anton nodded decisively. It's a private plane. A doctor will be with you constantly with the necessary equipment to help you if needed. I'm flying. The old woman nodded decisively and even stamped her foot. No, not yet, Anton thought. He hasn't earned this yet. I need to visit your neighbor from the first floor too. Walter. Anton, limping, stumbled into the apartment, pushing a light but stable wheelchair in front of him. It looked more like a modern, stylish mini car, for one. This, of course, won't replace your legs, but it's an amazing thing. Maneuverable, light. Honestly, I rode in it myself for half a day. Everything is adjustable. Armrests, footrests, backrest, headrest. Walter, honestly, is more comfortable than an expensive foreign car. And the main thing is the electric drive. 50 kilometers without recharging. I don't envy whoever goes for a walk with you. You'll tire anyone out now. And the wheels can handle anything. Asphalt, snow, even go to the desert. Walter, oh dear, it's just a chair. Walk, Walter, as much as you want, walk. Anton felt his hands squeezed by surprisingly strong, warm, and honest fingers. So, are you getting used to the new device? He nodded at Walter's mother, flustered, disbelieving, not knowing whether to cry or laugh, but having already shed her hopelessness and despondency somewhere. She looked at her son and openly admired him. We're waiting for everyone at Vicky's by the tree tonight. New Year's is coming soon. They finally gathered in the yard by the fir tree shining with garlands under a light snowfall. The boys, who were reluctantly torn away from a mountain of gifts, Walter, incredibly handsome, looking confidently ahead, obviously into the distances, he will roll in his new chair, his mother, 20 years younger, Victoria. He had no one to compare her to, his beloved, and there was no need. Oh, look who showed up. Not a speck of dust on him, came Irene's inimitable, creaky voice. Well, I'll be. So our foundling turned into a prince. Who would have thought? Ah, I didn't know. Or I would have nursed you myself. She headed toward the entrance, throwing over her shoulder. Vicky, tomorrow morning, make sure all the confetti papers are picked up. Get the prince out for the cleanup too. Don't forget. Irene, wait. Anton remembered himself, catching up with the neighbor. Wait, Irene, this is for you. He handed the woman a rectangular envelope. What is this? She stared at Anton with suspicion. This is a certificate for a full day at a beauty salon. Massage, manicure, hairdresser, masks, what else? Lots of things, whatever you want. But remember, you said a whole day just for yourself, like a real woman? Well, there you go. Happy New Year. Irene looked at Anton and Vicky, at the envelope with her beautiful feminine desires, at the fir tree burning with lights, and it was unclear what was glistening on her cheeks. Probably the snowflakes falling on them and melting from the warmth. And what did Santa Claus give you? Vicky smiled. Nothing yet. He shook his head sadly. He doesn't need anything except what one young woman has. She won't give it to me. Either she doesn't want to or she can't. She can? whispered the silver of her voice. Maybe she wants to very much. She's just shy. It's all yours, and only for you. Take it, possess it, play and rejoice. Just don't abandon it for long. Vicky and Anton sat side by side, pressed close together, in the yard, on a bench near the fir tree. There was complete silence around them, and it seemed to them that there was no one else in the world but the two of them. However, all lovers feel exactly that way. Quiet, light snow was falling from the sky, sifting down in delicate, weightless snowflakes. The fir tree, sparkling with lights, swayed a fluffy paw, and it seemed to Anton at the same time that a tall Santa with a white beard would peek out from behind it, threaten them with his staff, and ask sternly, "And who is giving out gifts left and right instead of me here?" The snow fell quietly, making the world whiter, cleaner, and kinder, more worthy of New Year's, undoubtedly happy and bright. "And I've solved your secret," Anton's whisper came. Vicky purred, pressing against his side. "It's very simple. If you want to be happy yourself, make someone else happy." And somewhere far away, as if agreeing with him, the New Year's chimes struck softly, resonantly, and joyfully.